ready?
We're ready.
Are we on?
Luke, we ready?
All right, let me know when you're ready, and we'll.
That's why I'm being over here helps.
All right, I don't have the thing, so we'll start. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our work session. We've got one item on the agenda. It is a Green Growth Toolbox Program follow-up.
Morning, council members. Justin Rometta here with Planning and Development, joined by my colleagues this morning, Zach Manner, who's the city's urban forester in the city's Parks and Recreation and Cultural Resources Department, and Sally Hoyt from Engineering Services Stormwater. We're here today to give you an update and report on some recent discussions that took place in the Growth and Natural Resources Committee. So our agenda this morning is to just briefly recap those discussions and then go over a list of items that the committee recommended for further action. That list of items is included in your backup material. It's separated into those that could be considered administrative actions and those that would require a text amendment either to the city's tree manual, the Unified Development Ordinance, or the municipal code, or some combination of the three of those. So just to briefly recap, back in September, the GNR committee received an overview from the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission on their Green Growth Toolbox. They also heard from staff on ways that our current regulations and practices align with that toolbox and areas where there is a potential to fill in gaps. The committee at that time gave staff some feedback on a host of items that they wanted further discussion on. Staff returned in November. We presented the committee with a menu of options for specific actions that council might take or direct. Ultimately, they recommended action on a number of items, the first of which you see here. And I'm going to run through this first batch of items and then turn it over to Zach and Sally to talk through the rest of the list. So the first item was a prohibition on using invasive species for any required landscaping element. So this is a provision that would apply only on private property that's being developed, so not in the city right away or city property or necessarily to individual homeowners, but property subject to the UDO as part of development. And it would require text change to the UDO, albeit it's a relatively straightforward one. And so for that reason, staff is recommending that if you move forward with authorizing this, we would bring it with the next list of omnibus text change items, which we plan on bringing forward to council in hopefully the next month or two for an initial review, and then obviously it would go through the text amendment process after that. Which leads us to the next item, which is related in that while that text change is working its way through the process, staff can work to provide some template zoning conditions that could be offered on conditional zoning cases. So the goal there would just to be to preview or mirror the language that would eventually end up in the UDO, but be able to have a more immediate impact on, at least with conditional zoning cases. The next item the committee directed was a review of the city's parking lot landscaping requirements. So for this, staff would conduct a thorough review and assessment, identify opportunities and challenges with these requirements. Specific areas of interest that the committee mentioned included increasing opportunities for GSI practices in parking lots, added flexibility, and potential alternatives to our existing parking lot landscape island requirements. That initial report is something we can bring forward relatively quickly, probably this spring or summer, and then again, ultimately, if text changes are authorized out of that, that would begin the process for those, which would take several months longer. So with that, I'm going to ask Zach to come up and go through the next batch of items.
council members, good morning. Zach Manor, Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources. So I'm going to talk about the next 3 items that were on the list, and we'll go through those as well. So first is ways to increase the opportunities for native and pollinator habitat. So if authorized, staff would get together to review existing examples of certified pollinator or native habitat criteria to make a determination if that's something that could work for the city or if it's something we need to create ourselves. Based on those recommendations, we would test implementation through park projects. And then as that moved along, if it was successful and as part of the process, we'd review city code for possible barriers and solutions related to the implementation on a larger scale. So things along the nuisance ordinance, which Mr. Remetta mentioned earlier related to yards and areas like that. The second piece is updating our possible street tree species list. This is, if directed, staff can update the possible street tree list to include more native options. This is an administrative change with a pretty low impact. This is an example of what our possible street tree list looks like, just to give you some reference. We also have a do not plant and a restricted planting. So depending on circumstances and locations, there are some variety of species that work. It isn't an exhaustive list, but it does provide some examples of trees that have worked in the city as a street tree. And the third piece is city projects and native plants. So this is an in-process work where staff are building a stakeholder group that can develop recommendations for a policy on plant use for city projects. This would preclude invasives and encourage the use of natives on all city projects. This is a great thing to test with our new sustainability review for capital projects. So this is something that could start fairly quickly. And I'll turn it over to Sally Hoyt from Stormwater.
Good morning. I'll be going through the 4 final selected strategies, which are all related to stormwater. The first is to allow privately built green stormwater infrastructure for regulatory purposes to be located in the right-of-way. And this is not currently allowed. It would require potentially changes to the stormwater and street manuals. We would review those as part of this action. There would also be coordination between departments in terms of determining the maintenance responsibilities for private regulatory GSI in the right-of-way. And then also the legal processes in terms of whether an encroachment agreement is required, whether a maintenance agreement is required, that sort of thing. The second item is related to green stormwater infrastructure and affordable housing. We've actually started on the first item here, which is to host an open house or information session for developers and designers who work in the affordable housing sphere to answer questions about stormwater permitting and about the use of GSI and about the existing R3 rainwater rewards, Raleigh rainwater rewards funding that is available. That has already been scheduled for late February of this year. We also have been coordinating with housing and neighborhoods and plan to interview some developers and designers working in affordable housing to get their input on how stormwater can best support their projects and make the process smooth. And then we've also spoken with housing and neighborhoods about explicitly dedicating some funding to affordable housing projects through their RFP process. And there's upcoming ones later this year that would be on property owned currently by the city, that the intention is that those would be long-term ground leases. And that opens up some possibilities for the city to do the maintenance on them because the city would retain ownership of the property. So those are all things we were proposing to investigate. The third item is also related to GSI in the right-of-way. This is regarding an existing section of the UDO, section 8.6.5, which basically allows a private development to install GSI in the right-of-way and receive, if it's beyond what is needed for their regulatory needs, and to receive reimbursement from the city. We have not had anyone take advantage of this since it was adopted in, I believe, in 2017. And the actions related to this are to make it a more attractive process, to work out the kinks in the process by developing reimbursement schedules ahead of time that would say how much the developer would get reimbursed, and we're hoping to identify a pilot project, maybe a project that is already working with the city on other public-private partnership items, to work through the process so that that future developers who are interested have a roadmap, and we know what are what the timeline would look like and the process would look like. The final item is to evaluate the stormwater program resources. We actually have already started on this one as well. So in our budgeting for fiscal year 25, we have included an expanded budget for R3, and this would come forward in the budget that comes to council. And we've also proposed a dedicated city crew within the Parks Department that would be funded by stormwater for GSI maintenance.
Good morning, Council. Pat Young with Planning and Development. I just wanted to remind you that it's traditional that you not take action at these work sessions. So we have the special item on your 1 o'clock meeting for any direction or specific action that you might want to provide us.
Thank you to staff for the presentation. So this item is on our regular meeting agenda under special items, which would be the appropriate time for us to give feedback or make any motions, but we do have the opportunity to ask questions right now based on the presentation. So are there any questions from council members? Councilmember Harrison.
Just want to thank staff for bringing all of these options to us, Justin, Zach, and Sally, and the various departments. I know you all are thinking about these things all the time, and so it's exciting to be able to push some of your efforts forward. I just want to say that these are discussions that came out of the Growth and Natural Resources Committee, so thank you to all of our GNR members. I even want to give a shout out to Amy Jo Edwards, who is a resident, I believe, of District E, who had originally made some of us aware of the Green Growth Toolbox and some opportunities there. So thank you, Amy Jo. But the only questions that I have is if you could remind me on the pre-vetted zoning conditions. I'm not sure exactly what the topics are there that we're looking at. And then also for natives on all city projects, are there any concerns about supply, or is that something we would kind of figure out through the process?
Yeah, so I can take the first question, and I'll let Zach speak to the other one. The zoning conditions would apply to, it would basically be the prohibition of invasive species. And so the goal there would be, as you go through the text change process, which might take several months to get codified and adopted and effective, in the interim, we could have zoning conditions that applicants or property owners could offer that would do that same thing.
Great, thank you.
Yes, in response to the native plant group, they would be working on looking for opportunities and challenges, looking at different department specifications, plan availability as part of their recommendation. So yes, it's to kind of start from scratch and see what they're doing and find the best way forward.
Great, thanks.
Councilmember Patton.
Yeah, I have a few. On the draft, the sample zoning conditions, I wondered if would it be possible, or has it been contemplated to include possible GSI conditions as well? I know there's been some cases where we've journeyed from simple to more complex language about how much is treated and volume and all of that.
So at the January Stormwater Management Advisory Commission meeting, we presented example rezoning conditions related to GSI and other stormwater topics, and we will be making some tweaks to that based on feedback from SMAC and sending a memo back for their February meeting. So those example conditions would be available to.
Got it. Okay, so that's already
anyone.
chugging along, which is why it's not included in here needing action. Understood. My next one's for you, Sally, so you can stay. The private regulatory GSI and the right-of-way, I'm sure this is true, but there would be like standards on when this is appropriate. I'm like in the picture that's placed here on the slide, it's a very urbanized, lots of impervious existing, but I think about some of the areas out in my district that are like clear cut where a larger like wetland would be more appropriate. I guess, will there be standards for when this is the right move?
Somewhat. It'll still be up to the developer to choose which stormwater control measure is the right one for their site.
Okay.
But we do provide some guidance on when to choose which type in the proposed stormwater design manual update. We will have some guidance on what will be allowed in the right-of-way. So for example, we would allow streetscape style bioretention, but we wouldn't allow a wetland to be in the right-of-way.
Okay, got it. And would these be ready for that current update to the stormwater design manual, or would you need longer to get this together and we'd update it again?
Our hope is to have enough worked out in that process so that it could be included with the current update. And then we also might need to make changes to the street manual, which to my knowledge is not currently going through an update. So that might be a longer lead time.
Okay, got it.
Any other questions? Councilmember Jones?
Thank you. Thank you so much. The first, under the first UDO slide, I was wondering what does the enforcement of the invasive species prohibition look like?
So that we would envision there would be, we did discuss this in the committee, that there would be a reference list that would be clear so that both property owners and staff know, what is on this list is not prohibited or is prohibited and what is not, and something that everyone can refer to. That would be an important piece of that text amendment. And enforcement would be on the front end when property is being developed, when the landscape plan is required. It's required to identify species and number of plantings. So it would be checked there, and then at the once a site's built out, there would be a final inspection to make sure that what was on the plan actually got planted.
Got it. Thank you so much. And then I just have an overall, I don't even know how to fully frame this question, but having served on the Parks Board and been in the SWEP committee, and I know that there's conversation about how do we have a group of, whether it's residents or staff, that cross multiple boards that have an ongoing look at this. So I think Marcia, who is here right now, hey Marcia, we had talked about like some sort of tree committee that would help make sure this conversation is ongoing and that it's not something that happens every few years when we have to do another green growth toolbox, but we have the people in place to continue that conversation. I'm wondering if you had any discussion around that.
I don't recall any discussion that took place during the committee meetings. Certainly that's something council could direct us to do potentially.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions from council? Councilmember Patton?
Yeah, sorry, I just have one more. This might be for each of the three departments, but a lot of the timelines presented to us encompass working through like Q1 of 2024, which we are in, and we're already consumed a month of. I was curious if we were to say, go forth and do all of these, like, are there some that would actually, like, can we actually put all three of these things or all four of these things on your to-do list for Q1? Or by saying yes to all of them, will some of them move farther into the future, if that question makes sense?
I can answer for the parks item. So the update to the tree list, that's very quick. We can do that, no problem. Sort of for the use of native plants on city projects, that group will be meeting for the first time this month. So depending on sort of how they come together and sort of what they're able to get done, that's why we sort of had to put a bit of a different timeline on it, because it will all depend specifically on what they end up coming through. And then for the last piece on the native and pollinator habitat, being able to analyze tools and make a determination on whether the city needs to create one should happen relatively quickly. But if we need to get into a situation where implementation and pilot projects happen, and then if it's determined that code changes need to be made down the line, that would, of course, come back to you folks. So that's going to extend that timeline out a little bit. So it isn't, I think it's starting in Q1 for those, and some of those have a longer completion time.
Any other questions from council members? Okay, so this item will be on our agenda this afternoon, so I look forward to more discussion or action at that time. That is our only agenda item for this work session, so we will be adjourned until 1 p.m.